Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 62, recording again from the hotel room in Indianapolis, where we are here at the Indianapolis NFL Scouting Combine. Don't know why I'm calling it the Indy Scouting Combine. It's the Combine. It's always an Indy, and that's the situation. It's Thursday, February 27th, second podcast of the week. Been bouncing around most of the days, meeting with people I know throughout the league, agents, team folks, Vikings folks, and it's been as good as it ever is. I got a lot for you guys, so stay tuned for that. I've got a bunch of things I just want to roll off the top of my head, kind of unload the notebook from some of the conversations I've had in Indy. Before we get going, as always, this show is presented by First Resource Bank. That is a member FDIC bank. In the local area, there are branches all over the place. My favorite branch is on Washington, near the Trader Joe's, kind of close to US Bank Stadium. Christie in there is phenomenal. The people who run it, Tim Siegley, Aaron Siegley, Charlie Anderson, they are great, great people. And you will be very appreciative that that is your banking platform because it's great and it's easy to use. If you guys have missed it and you don't know, I write about the team for The Athletic, and there are stories at theathletic.com. From this week, there will be more. I'm probably going to do a full-on what I kind of heard at the Combine, Vikings related on Monday. So please keep your eyes peeled for that. Should have a bunch of nuggets there that you guys will probably be interested in. I'd give them all to you guys today, but that is the day job. So I should probably hold on to some stuff over there. I wrote Tuesday after conversations with Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell about Sam Darnold. And then I wrote for Thursday a story about how much of a priority defensive tackle is going to be. And those conversations and those subjects will be dispersed throughout this show, which we will hop right into. I haven't taken questions this week because, I haven't had enough time to read them. I'm bouncing between hotel rooms. Right before I came up to record this podcast, I was in the elevator with Trace Armstrong, who's Kevin O'Connell's agent. And we were obviously conversing about the contract extension that was recently acquired by Kevin O'Connell. But that's how this thing goes. If you listen Tuesday, there's like 5 hotels. There's like 2 restaurants. I'll give a funny story about St. Elmo's. I'm walking down the street with my editor the other night and a woman behind us. Do you guys know where St. Elmo's is? It was as if that is the only restaurant in Indianapolis, and it kind of feels that way sometimes. But NFL people all over the place. Goodell was sitting close by the other day. Vikings people galore. I had a conversation earlier this morning with Josh McCown, and we were talking about Sam Darnold. So a lot of this stuff that I'm bringing you is not just off the cuff. It's not just conjecture. It is a byproduct of conversations I've had with all sorts of people throughout the organization and across the league. I'll start with the news kind of the moment. I mean, depending on when you guys listen to this, if it's Thursday afternoon, evening, you probably have just heard that the Chiefs are franchise tagging Trey Smith, the right guard, with the idea that they want to come to terms with him on a multi-year extension. Trey Smith, we've talked about him on the show. He was maybe the pinnacle free agent, premier free agent on the market because he's a young guy who's been very durable. He's very productive, and there's nothing with him off the field that is a concern. So when in terms of free agency, it's just like last year with Christian Wilkins, like guys who are really frontline players at their positions that are young and that are durable. When they hit the market, it's going to drive the price up. So that's the reality. I can say this with Trey Smith, and I was going to say this on the podcast without this information and this news today being the case, but the Vikings were definitely interested in Trey Smith. There's no question that the guard position is a major focus for them in this free agent period, and Trey Smith being the premier option, there's no question that was going to be something they kicked the tires on. Trey Smith's representatives work for CAA. They usually have conversations with the Vikings. They represent a ton of guys, including Sam Darnold and others. And so, I know the Vikings would have had conversations about that with Trey Smith, but it sounded like the last few days, for as interested as Minnesota was, and for as much as you started to hear that 23 number, and the tag is kind of around that 23.4 million number. It sounded like the Chiefs were very determined to keep him. Brett Veach, even at the podium in his podium session on Tuesday, seemed very optimistic about that happening. Now, they didn't come to terms on a long-term deal, or haven't yet, and they had to use the franchise tag, but it's probably an easier, a more palatable thing to try to do when the salary cap jumps the way it usually does, given the extent of where the NFL business lies. So, Trey Smith, again, the Chiefs franchise tagged him, so he is out of play for the Vikings, who really don't have the type of premium draft capital to be thrown around via trade. So that obviously, given the Vikings are in the guard market, or they're going to be interested in guards, their attention then turns to other guys. And The Athletic, we had a list of top, I think it was 100, 150 free agents. They tiered them by just quality. The first tier that included Trey Smith. The second tier, the guard in that second tier was Will Fries, who has been a versatile player for the Indianapolis Colts, has played here locally. He injured his fibia early this past season. And so the question really will be, how is he doing in the recovery from that injury, which is a lower body injury for a guy that has to move an anchor. I mean, it's an important thing to try to uncover. And then what does his market look like, and where does he want to go? But this is not based upon any specific intel, but I would expect the Vikings to kick the tires on Will Fries being a possibility. His representatives have crossover with some players who have been on the Vikings and who are also going to be priorities. So that's probably where the Vikings turn their attention to in that market. If you can't secure a Will Fries via free agency, it gets a little dicey in terms of, you're talking about Mekhi Becton, who obviously had a great year with the Philadelphia Eagles, but he played with that Jeff Stoutland offensive line. He's gigantic. I don't know how well he moves. He's more of just a physical thumper, and he's had experience with assistant offensive line coach Keith Carter, and I'm not sure he absolutely loved him as a coach. You can look up some of those stories. So he's becomes kind of an option you talk about. Patrick McCarry is a free agent who played with the Ravens. He's another versatile guy. I think he's also younger. I mean, as you think about, I want you guys to think about when the Vikings look at these market. I mean, age is a big factor in terms of their priorities. And so, I mean, you land on Patrick McCarry if it's not Will Fries. You talk about Tevin Jenkins, who played for the Bears but has a lot of injury stuff, and like opinions range very widely on him. And then, I mean, you even probably consider trades type avenues. But as I say that, just like I said with Trey Smith, it's a trade for a player like that would involve draft capital the Vikings can't afford to give up at this point in time, considering they only have 4 picks for 2025. So I think like fixating on Will Fries is probably going to be the idea, or where my head's at as this thing moves towards free agency, which I believe starts on March 10th. But the Trey Smith thing, I mean, it's tough, but I remember having conversations with people in the league at the end of the season where it's like a lot of the fans are like, we got to go get Trey Smith. And the comeback from people in the league was like, yeah, Alec, I bet you want to go get Trey Smith if you're the Vikings, but do the Chiefs want to give him up? And then to see what happened to the Chiefs front in the Super Bowl, it even became that much harder to envision them giving up on a guy who was a stalwart on their offensive line. And I've heard the criticism from people of like, well, he didn't play that well in the Super Bowl. I think if you go back and watch the tape, he was singled up one-on-one on Jalen Carter a lot of times. That is a very hard matchup. And I thought there were enough plays in that game where he held his own. So it makes sense why the Chiefs did that, because the market's probably only going to continue to climb. And it puts the Vikings, I mean, this is where, just like last year with Jonathan Grenard, like this stuff, Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel, this stuff is very competitive in terms of other teams are seeking similar type upgrades. there are plenty of them. If you go look at, at The Athletic, we've done stories where we ask every beat writer, like, what does your team need? And there are 5 of them that talk about upgrading the interior of the offensive line. The Chicago Bears were likely going to be in on Trey Smith as well, which would only increase the competition for him. And so, again, it places the onus on the Vikings staffers like Rob Brzezinski, like Emily Battis, and others to be able to secure the talent in these very competitive negotiations. And that's the job. And that's part of why, last year, it's not just the evaluation of the players you're acquiring, but it's also like, do you have a relationship with the agent to be able to come up with a number that makes sense, or a package for that player that they prefer over other places? So, that's the job that falls on them over the next couple of weeks. And for as great as last year was, it only goes so far if you don't replicate it. So that's where I'll start, because that is kind of the news of the afternoon. And it's worthwhile because, as you guys have read, and as I've said really for weeks now, like prioritizing a guard is definitely part of the free agent plan. Now, I will also say, like, I know they have done work on the interior of the offensive line in the draft, and even some of the top guys. And I don't need to name names now because we'll get into that over time. But if you go look at mock drafts and you see guys who are interior offensive line options, those guys are going to be interviewed by the team and sought after, probably, in terms of what would they fit, that type of thing. So it'll be interesting to see how this thing kind of sorts out now that Trey Smith, that domino, is already kind of fallen. The next thing I want to get to is Byron Murphy Jr. And I think I talked about him a little bit Tuesday, but I can just say this, having had the conversations that I've had now for multiple days. He is a big priority for this team to try to bring back. And it sounds like, talking to people close to him, like Byron Murphy Jr. wants to be back. And the question ultimately, as always with this stuff, is what is the number that fits for both sides? Like, I think I've said this before, but Byron Murphy Jr.'s agent is a guy named Zeke Sandu, who works for Clutch Sports, and he represented Daniil Hunter, and he likes taking guys to the open market. That's been something he's done in the past, and it makes sense. It's like, if you're open, let's say you're selling something and you're talking with a friend about it, and they're willing to offer a certain amount of money, you only hear it's just like the Luka Doncic with Nico Harrison and trading Luka to the Lakers. Like, yes, you wanted AD, that's great, but could you have gotten more if you had opened up the possibility of a competition to acquire that player? So, that's where it'll be interesting to see if Byron Murphy's want and priority to come back to Minnesota allows the Vikings and Byron's representatives to find the number. I've received questions of like, how much is Byron Jr. worth? Like, how much are they willing to go? It's interesting because I think opinions on Byron Murphy Jr. range league wide. Like, if you look at our Athletic free agent rankings, Byron Murphy Jr., I think, is 34th, and he's in like the 3rd or 4th tier. And you may be like, wow, then paying him a lot of money, 15 plus million or whatever it's going to be, paying him a lot of money, like does that really make sense? But I think Byron Murphy Jr. might be 34th on the free agent overall rankings from an external website, but he is able to do a lot of things. He can play in the slot. He can play on the outside. He can run the deep half at safety. He knows the defense. He's a guy in the locker room that is good. He's a willing tackler. He can blitz. There's ball production with him. He seemed to be even getting better. He's been durable. He was last year. So there's just a lot to like. And if you don't bring a guy like him back, given the amount of spots and the amount of roles he plays, then you might have to be talking about having multiple guys fill kind of what he does. So for as expensive as he might end up costing, it might kind of fill multiple holes because of his versatility. And so that's kind of where things stand in terms of, I really do think Byron Murphy Jr. is a big priority for the team. And if it doesn't happen, and if Zeke Sandu and Clutch Sports and ultimately they they can't come to terms with the Vikings and they go to the open market, I mean, there's going to be immense value and interest for him there. And then it's going to put the Vikings in another, similar to like with Trey Smith up the board. Now you're in backup plan mode, and you got to have multiple avenues where you have relationships with agents, where you have just ideas about players that fit. And that takes a lot of communication. That takes a lot of planning. That takes a lot of quick thinking, being willing to kind of take shots. And so, that's another one where I think if you think about this offseason, this free agency period over the next couple weeks, and you kind of wonder, or you're trying to outline where, like, the avenues, the paths that this thing goes down. The guard aspect is one of them. And then for me, I mean, maybe the primary conversation beyond quarterback and Sam Darnold is what happens with Byron Murphy Jr. and how does that kind of dictate what else is kind of the plan? If it's not him, what other avenues do they have for the cornerback spot? If it is him, what does that mean with the money they have to spend elsewhere? So that's kind of the second point I wanted to kind of go over here, and we'll just keep rolling. All right, next in terms of conversation points, I want to get to something I said on Paul Allen's show. I believe I was on Wednesday morning. You start to lose track of time when you are out eating at St. Elmo's in these places and having some beverages, you could say, with people across the league. It's a mentally incredible week because it tests your entire fiber of being, but I wouldn't want it any other way. But on Paul Allen's show Wednesday, I said I wouldn't be surprised if Harrison Smith came back, and it was aggregated, and I saw other people pull it, and that's totally fine because I knew what I said when I said it. And that I just kind of want to reiterate that if you didn't see that I said that on PA's show, just from having conversations, like I know how much Brian Flores values what he means to the system in terms of getting guys aligned pre-snap, in terms of placing the Vikings defense in a premium play. Like, he is the maestro. He is the orchestrator of all that stuff. And then for him, I mean, if you could still garner X million dollars and you love the game as much as I know that Harry does, it's just kind of a no-brainer. And so with him, like I was asked with PA, and I kind of wanted to outline it, it's his contract is structured in a way where there is a date at which the Vikings must kind of know the plan. But the reality is they kind of need to know even before that, because whatever Harrison decides and whatever that looks like is just like these other two subjects we've already talked about. It's going to dictate like the approach and the avenues the Vikings have to take. And I think that's the thing. I mean, the more you spend this week here and the more you talk to people, I mean, it is the ultimate free agency, and putting together a free agent class is the ultimate, like, choose your own adventure, where you have to adapt very quickly on the fly because you might hear something at a certain point. Another team might be willing to raise the market beyond where any of your expectations were. You may have to risk more than you wanted to. Like, it is this on the fly, quick thinking. You prepare, but then you kind of just have to adapt along the way. I mean, that's what this is. But I mean, with Harrison, the Vikings want him back. Like I said, I mean, Brian Flores feels how he does about him. And if Harrison is back, then it becomes a question of what about the other safety spot? Like, obviously there's Josh Metellus, but you guys listening to this know, because I've talked about it. I mean, Josh is not a traditional deep half safety. He plays as a slot defender. He lines up on the line of scrimmage. He lines up in the A-gap. He's almost a linebacker at times. And so I would not expect him to line up next to Harrison Smith as the deep half safety. He can play it in spurts, but I don't think that's where you want to live with Josh, which is totally okay because he applies to an opposing offense what Brian Flores wants a guy like him to apply within his scheme. And so, I mean, I will say, like, talking to people, I do think there is a lot of faith in Theo Jackson. There always has been. You've seen him. You've seen the media members every year in training camp in spring. We rave about him, usually on Twitter. He was a restricted free agent, and it's going to be interesting to see how other teams try to approach that. But I mean, the guy is a valued player on the roster. They believe he can really contribute. That's kind of the sense that I get, and so I don't know what that means for Cam Bynum. I mean, really, Cam Bynum, and I said it Tuesday, like he and the Vikings had negotiations leading up to the season. And I know Cam wants to be back in Minnesota, but the number that his representatives saw it just didn't match, I think, where the Vikings were willing to go. And so it's a similar question to Byron Murphy in the sense that, like, I mean, does his want to remain in Minnesota override the want to create the potential most maximum dollar value as you could possibly get? And that's a question that only they can answer. And it's really a conversation that the player and the agent has to have, in terms of the agent hopefully is working on behalf of the client to do that more than just try to maximize the money, unless that's what the player wants to do. I mean, that's the dynamics of these things. But if Harrison is back, and if Cam Bynum doesn't make sense at a certain cost, like Theo Jackson, to me, in that spot, I don't think that would scare anybody like crazy to do that. I would also say, like, I had a conversation with the Vikings coach about Jay Ward, and while I know he's received a lot of special teams criticism, he's had a bunch of penalties over the years. Like, I think there's more belief in what Jay Ward can be as a defender than I think I entered this week with, is just what I would say. So would I expect him to, like, no, but he's an interesting depth option for sure. Some other stuff that I just wanted to get to, and we're not going to spend a ton more time because I got to get back down to the lobby and have more conversations. And I got to save some stuff for this big story on Monday about what I've heard at the Combine. But I mean, the first place I'll start, I mean, the Grant Udinski loss to the Jaguars, like, the Vikings have definitely, I mean, that affected Kevin O'Connell, and like, it's definitely a big loss. I mean, there's no question. Like I talked to Josh McCown earlier, and he's joked with me a bunch of big shoes to fill in terms of Grant's absence. And he just worked so closely with Kevin O'Connell, and he's very young. So to me, it's like you can kind of you can spend your life and all of your energy on doing the best job you can, because you don't have like family aspects that kind of factor in. So definitely the Grant Udinski loss is tough. They're currently in the process of interviewing assistant quarterback coach candidates for anywhere from guys who have been at the college level to other folks kind of throughout the league. So I would expect kind of by next week to have a better feel in terms of the overall staff. But I think related to that is, I wouldn't be shocked if there are other roles kind of moved around. I tweeted this and kind of hinted at it on Wednesday, but guys who had certain roles on defense or on special teams or offense or analyst roles or assistant, like, we'll see kind of what the juggling of that title changes all kind of looks like. I'm also interested to see how they try to fill the void left by Josh Hinks, who took the same job with the Carolina Panthers. His contract had been up. The Panthers were willing to go to a place that it probably was going to make it really tough for Josh Hinks to turn down. But I think there had been some internal options, but maybe they'll hire, like, we'll see kind of, but that's one of those unheralded kind of roles that is very important for a team. I'm just trying to maximize how they kind of treat their players, which has been a calling card of what Kevin O'Connell has built. Another thing I wanted to say is, as I talk to agents who have players both on the free agent market or have had players on the Vikings roster in the last couple of years, I mean, you hear universally, like, and this is not a NFLPA report card thing, but you hear universally, like, these guys love, like, my client loves playing for that team, for that coach, to be in that environment. Like, a lot of guys want to be there. Now, I mean, ultimately, you look at the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs, and they rank pretty low on the NFLPA report cards. And obviously, with their production on the field, it didn't really matter. So that stuff only goes so far. But I do think it can be an edge for a team, especially as we talk about this free agent competition among other teams for guys. Like, I do think that is just one of those potential minor edges that plays a role. But I mean, let's not sugarcoat it. Like, money talks very loudly. As great as your organization, your infrastructure might be, like that's just the reality of it. And then I'll kind of end here because I think this is kind of a theme of the conversations that I have with people about this Vikings front office, about what they did last year in free agency, and kind of about the way that they are approaching and thinking about this thing this time around. First, I think the continuity with the front office is a massive plus in terms of trying to make as smart and as educated bets, decisions like around this time. That I think the continuity of Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and some of his staff, knowing what kind of the process they want to take is, knowing how to work with like defensive coordinator Brian Flores on options and what he likes and how he likes to go about it. I think the continuity is a plus, but more than anything, it's like they're pretty crafty, and this front office, and it's not just me like because again, last year's free agent class, if this year's an absolute dud, then being crafty doesn't. But they think about very minor edges. The comp pick considerations are always in their mind, no question about it. They try to give themselves, I mean, Kwesi says the word optionality all the time, which is a very smart word. That means they try to give themselves runways depending on if something's blocked, then we got to adapt. Let's go there. And it's all within the confines of players they feel like fit what they want to do. And so that's just kind of like the vibe that I get when I have the conversation with people in the building, outside the building, is like this group specifically is willing to think pretty creatively in terms of, okay, when's this guy going to be available? How much is this guy going to be worth? Would we rather pay this guy this from a risk standpoint? I mean, the age considerations that I already mentioned, injury risk, all of that stuff, like they factor this stuff. It's not like they just get enamored with the player and they just make that happen. I mean, it's very thoughtful in terms of how they allocate the resources they have, and I think it makes you feel like it should make you guys on the outside feel like it gives you a good chance of optimizing what's possible. But again, they've got to go out and do it, and doing it last year has no guarantee that it's possible this year, or that even if they execute and find the players they want to in free agency, that it's going to go the way it did last year. That's just probably a lofty expectation, but the craftiness of it, I do think, is worth mentioning. So that's what I've got here on Thursday afternoon. It's kind of just a hodgepodge of things that have been swirling through my head that I've written some of, but I haven't written all of. And I've got a ton more coming Monday. I mean, and whether it be like a Dallas Turner, whether it be special teams, whether it be other free agent kind of ideas, thoughts, other players, like please look for that story Monday on The Athletic. And I hope this gave you guys kind of a good enough perspective as we have, again, less than 2 weeks until free agency. But any questions you've got, just like I said last episode, toss them to me on social media. Throw them in the comment section. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. Helps us out a ton. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, you can rate and review and all that good stuff over there. As always, the show is presented by First Resource Bank. We will be back next week with a couple episodes, maybe a few, because I want to preview free agency and have some pretty bang up guests to be able to kind of help me do that. Presented by First Resource Bank, the Alec Lewis Show. We will see you guys next week. Thank you guys for listening, and have a phenomenal weekend.